Welcome explorers today. Dive into this thrilling TTP narration of Ghosts in the Avalanche by Banancake, an ongoing fan-made book from the Nature of Predators series by Spacepaladin15 on r/HFY.
Memory transcription subject, Vickery, the honey badger. Date, standardized human time May 18, 2137. Chapter 9, White Eyes. The sedative is administered orally. Just drink it, wash it down with some water, and you're done. Dr. Rayner crossed his legs in his chair next to my bed. The side effects are mild. A little muscle weakness, dry mouth, dizziness, photosensitivity. The way this works though is a little, well, let's just say it isn't exactly gentle about putting you to sleep. Definitely not something most would take as a nightly sleep aid. He adjusted his glasses as his eyes moved from his clipboard to me. I understand this must be frightening, considering your past night terrors. How are you feeling about it? I breathed deeply and fidgeted with my paws. I'm nervous, for sure. The nightmares seem to get worse with time. I can't remember most of them, but I remember the one I had in the car with Andy quite vividly. Rayner nodded. Are you comfortable with sharing what it was? I sighed. It was just a dream, it's not going to kill me. Rayner nodded his head forward slightly. Well, yes, but these nightmares seem to be a direct result of your illness. Dreams can offer a window into your mind. The things your brain hides from you. Their contents could be important. I looked down and let my paws rest on my lap. I inhaled deeply. I dreamed that my sister died, I rasped. She died in my arms. Some strange figure shot her. And the anger I felt, I stuttered, disturbed by the memory. It all felt so real, I breathed. Rayner nodded, narrowing his eyes thoughtfully. And this figure, do you have any idea who it might have been? I shook my head. No, but it felt familiar. Like I knew it, somehow. It had these glowing white eyes, that's the only detail I could make out. Rayner leaned back in his chair, creasing his eyes thoughtfully. Interesting. Perhaps there is something you fear that you can't describe. Something hidden. Or maybe something you have yet to acknowledge. He rubbed his hands together gently before leaning forward again. It's entirely possible that you'll dream again once we do this. In fact, from what I've read, this sedative tends to intensify them. Many report lucid dreaming after taking it. I scoffed and shook my head. Great, I groaned. But look at it this way, he slid his chair slightly closer. Everything that happens in those nightmares is a reflection of what's going on in your head right now. He tapped a finger to his temple. And if your mind isn't healthy physically, then there's not much I can do to help you get to the root of the problem. So I'm asking you to face them, Vickery. That's the only way we're going to put a stop to them once and for all. I looked at him briefly before exhaling. I guess I have no choice. Rayner nodded slowly as he stood up. You'll be under observation the entire time. If you start walking around, doing anything dangerous, we'll put a stop to it and wake you up. He began walking toward the door, tucking his clipboard under his arm. In the meantime, some people are here to see you. He smiled as he opened the door and Andy, Vivry, and Garrett filed in. Rayner took his phone from his pocket and placed it to his ear, answering a call before he disappeared further down the hallway. Vivry sprinted toward my bed and knocked the wind out of me as her head collided with my chest. She wrapped her arms around me tight before I even got the chance to say anything. I'm sorry, she croaked. I placed a paw on her head, confused. For what? I scoffed. I shouldn't have let them call you. I should have hung you up or something. I should have known it wouldn't end well, she strained. Andy approached closer, holding her arm close to her side by the elbow. And if I had told her what happened the night before, she might have done it. So, I'm sorry too. I should have known better than to leave you like that. It won't happen again, she asserted. I feel as though I'm not free of blame here either, Garrett chimed in, sitting in the chair near my bed. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have assumed you were comfortable with shooting. I don't know the whole story, but I should have figured you'd be struggling with some things after going through something like that. Don't you spare even a thought for work, all right? Take all the time you need. For a moment, I scanned around the room, unsure what to say. Vivri was still threatening to crush my ribcage. I don't get it. Why are you all apologizing? You were just going about your lives, and I dragged you all into this. I should have had a better handle on myself. Vivri raised her head. We're here because we care about you, Vikri. And we're staying until you're better. I stared at Vivri for a moment before scanning the rest of the room. Andy nodded in agreement. As I stuttered, trying to find the words to say, I noticed Raynor walking back toward the door. He slid it open as he finished up a call. All right, thank you, we'll get started as soon as possible. He pressed the screen and placed the device back in his pocket. A thin smile crawled across his face as he shuffled. The medicine is ready. How about you? I lay on a soft bed in a dark room. The walls were painted a soft blue, sparsely decorated with paintings and other cozy decor. There was a wooden chair next to me, as well as a nightstand with a lamp. An entire room dedicated to sleep studies. I wondered if hospitals on Venlil Prime had something similar. I doubted it would be this welcoming. Dr. Raynor entered the room, shutting the door behind him. He sat in the wooden chair next to me and placed a small vial on the nightstand. Comfortable? He asked, crossing his legs. Yeah. I don't really know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. This is more comfortable than my own bed. I turned and looked at the vial on the nightstand. It was half full of a clear, reddish liquid. Is that the sedative? I asked, looking up at the doctor. It is, he confirmed. He picked it up and carefully removed the cork in the top. I know it might not mean much to you, but it smells wonderful, he chuckled, waving it around in front of his face. Hopefully that means it tastes good too. Yeah, I breathed. I hope so. My eyes left his as I looked down at the white, quilted blanket covering my lower body. Raynor placed a hand over my shoulder. It'll be all right, Vic. Remember what I said. It's your mind. You're in control here. He handed me the vial. You just have to take the reins. I stared down at the liquid and swallowed before I exhaled. What does it smell like? Raynor squinted. Kinda fruity. Maybe a little earthy. I snickered. All right, whole thing at once? Yep. All of it, Raynor nodded. I gripped the vial somewhat tighter before putting it to my mouth and turning it over. It was sweet tasting with a mild burning sensation as it went down my throat. Raynor handed me a small cup of water and I washed down what remained in my mouth. I placed the cup on the nightstand and looked up at the doctor. So, now what? Raynor stood and began approaching the door. Now you settle in and sleep. Nurses will rotate in every hour to log your vitals. If you need anything at all, hit that button next to your bed. There will be someone just outside this door at all times. He flicked off the light and the room went dark. Try to relax and let the medicine do its thing. He left the room and shut the door behind him. A soft, yellow glow from the bottom of the door was the only remaining light source in the room. I anxiously turned over and pulled the comforter over me. I took a deep breath as I stared at the vibrant blue night flower next to my bed. Its petals swayed softly in the draft from the air conditioner as the room grew colder with time. Minutes later, my vision began to stretch and warp slightly as I felt my body become heavier. A fog descended over my mind, obscuring all the anxiety and worry running rampant in my head. The room went out of focus while the flower remained clear, glowing softly in the darkness. The last images in my imagination were a flashback of the day I first came face to face with Lucky. The memory of her confused, terrifying, and adorable face looking down at me after she'd saved me from that bear. I clutched the sheets beneath my paws tightly as a single tear ran down my face before the sedative did its work. Slowly, I closed my eyes, and a long overdue sleep fell over me. Please be okay, friend. Slowly, my eyes fluttered open. Immediately, I felt an icy chill siphoning away my body heat. I shivered violently as I stirred, sitting upright. The moon and starry sky above bathed the sea of snow around me in a ghostly white glow. The tall pines surrounding me waved back and forth in the turbulent winds that howled through the forest. Their shadows seemed to trail behind them as they waved back and forth in a strange, ominous blur. I clumsily rose to my feet, falling against a tree trunk for support. I tucked my arms tight to my body as the shivering continued. Looking down, I saw that my fur was frozen. White patches of ice had formed at the edges of my coat, slowly freezing upward toward the roots. What wasn't frozen was covered in a powdery layer of snow. I exhaled with a raspy, shivering breath, and saw a cloud of vapor rise into the night sky. It felt as though I'd been laying in that spot for days, slowly freezing solid. An intense, stabbing soreness surged through my arms and legs. The areas of my paws that weren't entirely numb stung with swelling pain. I shuddered as I leaned off of the tree, trembling as I struggled to support my own weight. I stumbled forward with heavy strides through the deep snow, keeping my arms tucked into my body as I fought for every breath. My mind was addled with a delirious fog that dulled my senses. It felt as though I might collapse at any moment. The forest around me was endless, stretching into infinity in all directions. Time seemed inconsequential. It was impossible to tell if I'd been walking for minutes or hours. The forest seemed frozen in time, with no life in sight. As I shivered and continued trudging forward, searching for a way out of the pines, a glowing, white liquid thudded into the snow just a few feet in front of me, sending up a cloud of steam as the snow vaporized on contact. The liquid turned bright red as the snow around it melted. Molten metal. Suddenly I noticed a shadow slowly creeping over the ground, blotting out the moonlight. I craned my neck upward to see the silhouette of a ship slowly passing overhead. The massive spacecraft was a mangled hulk of steel with scattered fires burning on its exterior. Glowing plasma craters on the outer armor poured molten slag onto the forest below, sending up clouds of steam wherever they landed. I stopped shivering as a different chill overtook me. Realization. The ship slowly crept over me, revealing its starboard side as a frosty film of moonlight glistened on the metallic hull. I saw the emblem of a vibrant red bird soaring through the air. Beside it in faded, white letters was UNS Cardinal. The iron bulwark groaned and creaked as its haunting shadow drifted further and further away, seemingly moving with no propulsion. I flinched as the entire night sky lit up all at once. Hundreds of bright trails of fire began streaking through the sky, all going in the same direction, slowly drawing burning stripes across the stars as they plummeted to the earth. A meteor shower of shipwrecks. I stood there in a numb state of awe as I watched the scene unfolding. That numbness was quickly replaced with dread as I noticed something approaching me from deeper in the forest. A pair of glowing, white eyes pierced through my very being. I recognized it. But I didn't know what it was. I began to turn and run before I realized something. This is a nightmare. My nightmare. I felt a strange sense of clarity as I realized that everything, all of this, was just in my head. The panic burning in my chest dimmed away. I paused, standing slightly straighter. The frost on my fur began dripping into the powder beneath me as it slowly melted. There was nothing here that could hurt me any more than it already had been. I slowly turned back around, meeting the gaze of the mysterious figure. Its eyes seemed to track onto mine. I swallowed a breath as I peered through the darkness, trying to make out its figure. As it slowly approached, it became apparent that it was some kind of predator. It had forward-facing eyes, large claws on its feet, and a shadowy color that blended almost perfectly with the shadows. It made no noise as it slowly stalked toward me. I drew in a breath through my teeth, filled with fiery anger that pierced through the fear. "What are you?" I shouted. "What do you want from me?" The air seemed to stand still as the shrill howling of the piercing winds was replaced by the sound of distant sonic booms and explosions as debris continued raining down in the distance, streaking across the face of the moon in a colorful display of death and destruction. Then, for the first time, I heard the creature make a noise. A deep, guttural growl reverberated through the air as the figure began to step closer still. I could hear it breathing as clouds of vapor rose from its hidden face. I could hear its claws digging into the snow with every step. It continued approaching until it was less than a step away from me. I began breathing heavily, but continually reminded myself that this was a dream. This was my monster. I didn't run from the Federation. I didn't run from the wolves. I didn't run from the Arxer. I was done running from this. The creature stopped in front of me, and I realized that it wasn't that much bigger than me. In fact, it was almost the same height. I pulled in a ragged breath of cold air that burned my throat. "Who are you?" I breathed. For a moment, nothing but silence followed. I could see Cardinal continuing to drift aimlessly through the night sky toward the brilliant full moon. Suddenly, it felt as though the shadows in front of me began to dissipate like ink being dropped into water. I leaned back slightly as a new sound began emanating from the figure. Not snarling, growling, or any discernible voice but sobbing. Agonizing, ragged sobbing that sounded all too familiar. Disturbed and confused, I watched with rising anticipation as the inky fog continued to dissipate. The figure shrunk until its form was no longer a fearsome, terrifying predator, but just a thin, frail silhouette of a Venlil. Suddenly, all at once, the fog vanished, revealing a dark-toned Venlil with bright, orange eyes with a small silver spot in one of them that continued shimmering with that same white glow for just a moment before the Venlil collapsed to his knees. It was me. Tears ran down my face as I continued sobbing into my paws. My fur was matted and even missing in some places, revealing deep cuts in my skin. Splotches of red and orange blood stained my fur. My claws seemed longer and jagged. My eyes were bloodshot as tears continued pouring out of them, soaking the fur on my face. I looked down at the bizarre mirror of myself, stunned, before an impossibly bright light shined on the horizon, melting away the ice of my fur in an instant. I shielded my eyes as a shockwave began to level the entire forest, sending a wall of debris rocketing toward me in a giant wave of fiery destruction. I shielded myself with my arms and turned away. I gasped. The blinding light was replaced by the morning sun shining between the blinds on the other side of my room. I was lying face up with my head buried deep into a pillow. I shivered as I felt something ice cold against my limbs. I began to stir before Rainer approached from a chair on the other side of the room. "Easy, Vickery. Stay still a moment." He sat on the side of my bed and took a brief look at the monitor next to it, looking over my vitals. He then removed the thin blanket covering me, revealing bags of ice placed under my arms and over my legs. I sat up slightly as Rainer began to remove them. He placed a hand over my head for a moment before sighing and taking off his glasses, rubbing his eyes before he put them back on. His eyes were baggy and bloodshot. "Still a little warm, but I think you'll be all right. How do you feel?" I drowsily looked around the room for a moment. I rubbed my eyes. "What's with the ice? How long was I out?" "Just shy of 13 hours, Rainer replied, looking at his watch. "You started shivering violently about 2 hours in. Your body temperature skyrocketed, but you were still asleep. We kept you on ice to stop you from overheating. You had me worried sick that we might have gotten the sedative wrong." He breathed deeply. "But it seems like it worked." I didn't sleepwalk. Or say anything." Rainer shook his head. "No, you were quiet aside from the shivering. Do you feel rested?" I sat up all the way. "Yeah. It feels like I can finally sort of think straight." I looked over at him and took a long, shaky breath before speaking again. I could feel my heart in my throat. "Lucky?" I felt sick. Part of me resisted even asking. If she was dead, I'd never forgive myself, and I wasn't sure Rainer could do anything about that. Raynor smiled. The surgeon says you owe him a beer. My mouth hung open as I stared at him. Raynor nodded. She's alive, Vickery. And they're expecting a full recovery. Like ice, the sickening worry that had been threatening to drag me into inescapable darkness melted away and came out as tears. The relief I felt was indescribable. I rested my head back against the bed frame and placed my paws over my face, sobbing as I was overtaken by a bizarre flurry of regret and anger over what I'd done, and immense happiness that my best friend was still alive. I inhaled shakily. You have no idea how good it is to finally hear that, I croaked, fighting to draw in the next breath. I felt a firm, but comforting grip on my shoulder. Through my blurry vision, I could see Raynor smiling, his own eyes glassed over slightly with tears. Things are going to get better from here on out, Vickery. You and I are going to make sure of it. He stood up as I wiped my face. Raynor cleaned his glasses. Take it easy for a while. I'll have a nurse make sure you're all good, then we'll meet in my office in an hour. The fun part starts now.